The most terrifying servants of the Dark Lord were not beasts born of malice, but angels who chose to fall from grace. They were spirits of the same celestial order as Gandalf, but they traded their sacred fire for shadow and flame. The duel in Moria was not a wizard fighting a monster. It was a clash between two divine beings of equal stature, a battle whose origins trace back to the very first notes of creation. This is the untold story of the Valaraukar, the demons of might, and how the purest fire of the world's making was corrupted into its most destructive shadow. Before time, before light, before the world known as Arda was even a thought, there was only the one, Eru Ilúvatar. From his thought, he brought into being the Ainur, the Holy Ones. These were not beings of flesh and blood, but spirits of immense power, each a fragment of Ilúvatar's mind, each possessing a unique understanding of the grand design of existence. They were the architects of reality, the weavers of the cosmic tapestry. Ilúvatar brought the Ainur together and proposed to them a theme of music, a celestial symphony from which a new world would be born. The Ainur, using their divine voices, were to take this theme and embellish it, to weave their own thoughts and personalities into the great song. As they sang, a vision of the universe unfolded before them, a breathtaking display of stars and planets, of mountains and oceans, of life taking its first fragile hold. Among the Ainur were two orders. The greater were the Valar, the 14 most powerful spirits who would become the governors of the new world. But there were also the Maiar, a multitude of lesser spirits, of the same kind but of a lower degree. They were intended as the helpers and servants of the Valar, each drawn to one of the great lords and their specific domain. The wizard Aloran, who would one day be known as Gandalf, was a Maiar. So too was Mairon the Admirable, a brilliant servant of O'Toole the Smith, who would later be called Sauron. And among the Maiar, there were those who were spirits of fire. They were bold, energetic, and powerful, drawn to the raw, untamable energies of creation. In the beginning, they were not evil. They were beings of pure, white-hot flame, their essence tied to the very heat that forges stars and beats in the heart of the world. They were magnificent, and their potential was immeasurable. They were known in the high tongue of the elves as the Valaraukar, the Solenti, demons of might. But the great music was not destined for perfect harmony. The most powerful of all the Ainur was Melkor, brother to Manwë, king of the Valar. Pride and a desire for his own dominion grew within him, and he began to weave his own themes into the music. His song was loud, vainglorious, and endlessly repeated, a violent counterpoint to the subtle grandeur of Ilúvatar's design. It was a theme of fire and ice, of darkness and ruthless ambition. This discord was alluring to those spirits whose nature was already fierce and impetuous. Melkor's theme was a song of liberation. He did not need to conquer the spirits of fire, he seduced them. He offered them a purpose beyond mere servitude, a chance to express the full, roaring totality of their fiery nature without the constraints imposed by the Valar. He spoke of power, of commanding the fundamental forces they embodied, rather than simply shaping them. They listened. They were drawn into his orbit, their loyalty shifting from the harmony of creation to the symphony of destruction. Their pure fire was corrupted, turning from the flame of life and forging into a conflagration of utter annihilation. When the music ended and Arda was made manifest, these Maiar followed Melkor into the new world, not as helpers, but as his lieutenants of terror. They became Balrogs. But if these beings were so powerful, divine spirits on par with a wizard, how were they ever defeated? And why did they seem to dwindle in number, from entire armies to a single lonely demon haunting the depths of a mountain? The answer lies in the very first wars ever fought upon the soil of Middle-earth. When the Valar descended into Arda, they began to shape the world according to the vision of the music. But Melkor arrived with them, claiming the world as his own. With him came his legions, and chief among them were the Balrogs. They were his shock troops in the War of the Powers, a conflict of such cataclysmic scale that it reshaped continents. These were not battles of men or elves, but of gods and their divine servants. The Balrogs of this era were beings of nightmarish power. They were not merely large monsters. They were fallen angels clad in a physical form of shadow and flame, a shell to house their immortal, raging spirits. The shadow that clung to them was no mere absence of light. It was a cloak of tangible dread, and their primary weapons were whips of living fire that could writhe and tear and disarm foes with terrifying speed. For ages, they served Melkor in his first great fortress, the subterranean hell of Utumno. There, in the freezing north of the world, They commanded his Orcish legions and tormented his captives.
They were lords in a kingdom of darkness, their fiery essences a perfect match for the volcanic heart of their master's domain.
But their reign of terror was interrupted. When the first children of Ilúvatar, the elves, awoke in the world, the Valar resolved to end Melkor's dominion once and for all.
In a war that shook the foundations of the world, the Valar laid siege to Utumno and broke its gates asunder.
They delved deep into its pits, captured Melkor, and bound him in an unbreakable chain. Yet, in the chaos of the fortress's destruction, many of his foulest servants escaped. While Sauron fled and went into hiding, the Balrogs burrowed deep into the earth, finding refuge in the darkest chasms at the roots of the mountains.
They burrowed into the roots of the world and waited. For 3 long ages they slumbered in silence as the world changed above them.
But their master, now known as Morgoth, eventually returned to Middle-earth. From his new fortress of Angband, he sent out a call, a pulse of dark power that echoed in the deep places. One by one, the Balrogs answered. They rose from their ancient slumber, their malice undimmed, and took their place once more as the high commanders of the Dark Lord. At their head was a being of singular terror, the greatest and most powerful of their order, Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs and High Captain of Angband. He was Morgoth's most devastating general, a being whose very presence on the battlefield meant the death of kings and the turning of tides.
He carried a great black axe that was feared as much as Morgoth's own hammer, and his whip of flame sent despair into the hearts of the mightiest elven warriors.
It was Gothmog who slew Feanor, the greatest of all elves, at the very beginning of the Wars of Beleriand. It was Gothmog who broke the siege of Angband, and it was Gothmog who, in the final years of the war, was tasked with the destruction of the last great hope for the free peoples, the hidden city of Gondolin. The assault was a vision of hell made real. Mechanical dragons of iron and fire crawled over the mountains, spewing forth legions of orcs, while the sky was blotted out by smoke and ash. At the head of this infernal army strode Gothmog, his purpose clear, to cast down the city of the elves and extinguish its light forever. The elves of Gondolin, renowned as the most valiant warriors of their age, fought with the fury of desperation. The fighting was fiercest at the King's Square, where the last defenders made their stand.
Here, the great elf lord Ecthelion of the Fountain, his silver armor battered and stained, his face pale with exhaustion, but his eyes blazing with defiance, saw the great demon advancing. Gothmog had just struck down the king, Turgon, and now raised his black axe to shatter the remaining line of defenders. Ecthelion knew there was only one path left. With a final, desperate battle cry, he lowered his head and charged. His charge was not one of hope, but of pure, nihilistic sacrifice. Gothmog, caught for a split second by the sheer audacity of the attack, swung his axe, but Ecthelion was already inside its reach. The elf lord drove the pointed spike of his helmet with all his remaining strength into the Balrog's chest. The demon roared, a sound of shock and agony that cracked stone, and its fiery blood gushed forth, searing Ecthelion's flesh. In its death throes, Gothmog's flailing limbs entangled with the elf, and unbalanced, the two figures, the Lord of the Fountain and the Lord of Balrogs, toppled backwards into the great fountain of the king. The waters boiled, and the fires of the demon were extinguished forever. Both Gothmog and Ecthelion perished in that final, desperate embrace. The greatest of the Balrogs was slain, but it came at too high a price. Gondolin fell, and with it, the last great kingdom of the Noldor in Beleriand was extinguished. The First Age was drawing to its bloody, catastrophic close. In the final war, the War of Wrath, the Valar finally put an end to Morgoth's reign. In this final conflict, it is said that the last of the Balrogs were destroyed. Thrown down into fiery chasms, their physical forms shattered by the sheer divine power of the host of the West, their spirits were left to gnaw on their own malice in the endless void. All of them, save one, or perhaps a few. And here is where the story you think you know breaks apart. For ages, this has been the accepted tale. A legion of demons served their master, and when he fell, they were all but exterminated. A simple, clean narrative of good triumphing over evil. But is it the truth? Is it ever that simple? Think about what a Balrog truly is. A Maiar, a divine spirit of the same order as Sauron, as Gandalf, as Saruman. Immortal, primordial, beings of immense power, who chose to pour their essence into forms of shadow and flame. Now ask yourself this. When you shatter the vessel, do you truly destroy the spirit within, or do you merely unleash it? The Elven histories, our primary source, are written by the victors, and they speak of the Balrogs of Angband, Morgoth's Balrogs. But what if Morgoth wasn't their creator,
but simply their most effective recruiter. What if his Balrogs were just one faction? The music of the Ainur was corrupted by Melkor's discord. His theme was one of domination, yes, but also of untamed, destructive, elemental fury. What if some Maiar were not drawn to Melkor's ambition, but to the very essence of the discord itself?
Spirits of fire and wrath, who answered the call of the raging heart of the world, not the call of a would-be king.
Were these spirits also rounded up and destroyed in the War of Wrath? Or were they something else entirely, unaligned and unaccounted for, slumbering in the deep places where not even the Valar looked? This brings us to the Second Age, an age of seeming peace. Morgoth is gone, and Sauron is in hiding, gathering his strength.
The great dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm is at the peak of its glory.
Beneath the three mightiest peaks of the Misty Mountains, they delve for Mithril, the legendary true silver.
For over 1,000 years of the Second Age, and for nearly 2,000 years of the Third, they lived and worked directly above a presence of unimaginable terror.
Did they know it was there? It seems impossible they didn't.
Perhaps they felt it.
A deep hum in the rock, a warmth that had no earthly source, a darkness in the deepest minds that felt watchful. They may have mistaken it for the groaning of the mountain itself, the spirit of the earth. In a way, they might have been right. This being was not an active general awaiting orders. It was not plotting or scheming like Sauron. It was simply sleeping, a remnant of a primordial age, a knot of ancient fury buried in the bedrock of the world. Then, in the year 1980 of the Third Age, the dwarves, in their greed, delved too deep. They broke into a chamber that had been sealed since the world was young, and they woke it up. What emerged was not just a monster, it was an event, a geological cataclysm, given form and malice. Durin's Bane, as it came to be known, was not like Gothmog. It did not lead an army of orcs. It did not wield a black axe or seek to conquer territory for a master. It acted more like a natural disaster. It simply annihilated. It rose from the depths, slew the dwarven king, Durin VI, and his son Nain, and drove the most powerful kingdom of dwarves from their ancestral home in utter ruin and terror. And then it settled. For the next 500 years, Moria became a place of dread, a black hole on the map of Middle-earth.
Orcs and trolls, drawn to the creature's shadow, crept in and infested the ancient halls.
But the Balrog did not command them. It did not seem to care about them. It was the apex predator, the dark heart of the mountain, and everything else was just carrion crawling in its shadow. It ruled a kingdom of one. This raises the most chilling question of all. What does a Balrog do when it has no master? Is it capable of thought, of memory? Does it remember the light of the two trees? Does it remember the music of creation? Or has untold eons of rage and isolation burned all of that away, leaving only a divine engine of destruction? When the Fellowship of the Ring passed through Moria, they were not trespassing on a military outpost of Mordor. They were walking through the lair of something far older, and perhaps far more terrifying. Sauron knew of the Balrog in Moria, of course. The orcs there were loosely allied with him, but even the Dark Lord did not, and could not, command it. This was a power from his master's day, an independent agent of the old world's ruin. When Gandalf confronted the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, it was not merely a clash between a wizard and a monster. It was a confrontation that echoed across the ages. It was a Maia of Valinor facing a Maia of the flame of Udun.
Two divine spirits, born of the same celestial fire before the dawn of time, now locked in mortal combat in the deepest root of the world.
Gandalf called himself a secret fire, servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Valinor. This was not mere boasting. The secret fire is the flame imperishable, the divine spark of Eru Ilúvatar, the source of all life. The flame of Aenor is the sun, the light of the new world. He was fighting shadow with the very power of creation. And the Balrog?
It was a wielder of the flame of Udun, the fire of the abyss, of endless rage, the elemental fury of the world's molten heart. This was not a clash of wizardry and brute force.
It was a battle of fundamental principles. Light against darkness, order against chaos, the creative spark against the unending hunger of the void.
Their fall was a journey back through time, through the foundations of the mountains, to the primordial water and stone at the world's base.
And there, far from the eyes of any living thing, the battle continued, a silent, titanic struggle between two ancient powers, raging up the endless stair. From the lowest dungeon to the highest peak, they fought, until at last, on the pinnacle of the world, Gandalf smote his foe, and its ruin was hurled down the mountainside. The spirit was cast out, its physical form broken. But in achieving this victory, Gandalf himself was spent. His body was destroyed. He passed out of thought and time. He was sent back, clothed in white, his power enhanced for the war to come. One Balrog was finally accounted for, but the question that haunts the lore of Arda remains. The question we began with: was Durin's Bane the last of its kind? Or do other, older things still lie sleeping in the deep places of the world, waiting for the careless, the greedy, or the desperate to once again delve too deep? The history of Middle-earth is not just a tale of men and elves, but of the echoes of creation itself, of divine powers that walk and crawl and slumber just beneath the surface of the world. These are the stories we explore, to journey deeper into the untold tales of the Elder Days, and to ensure you never miss a chapter of this grand saga. Subscribe now to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles. The abyss is deep, and the history is deeper still.